5、4、3、2、1。
Здравствуйте, and welcome to episode 14 of the SF in Translation podcast. I'm Rachel Cordasco.
And I'm Daniel Hauser.
This episode will include news and updates from April 1st through April 30th.
And it's been a busy month.
I know, right?
Yeah, how are you doing?
I am the weather is horrible, and I drank coffee and tea, and my brain's still not working today, so hopefully this episode will,
will wake us up.
Yeah, I mean,
the weather keeps fluctuating a lot here, and that always does tremendous damage to my sinuses and my brain.
Yeah.
So it's been really cold, but then really, really warm and humid, and then back to cold again.
I know. I'm just a mess.
Lousy smarch weather.
Smarch?
Yeah. Simpsons reference.
Aw, man, I've seen every episode and I didn't get that.
It's a Halloween one, I think. The one that's on the shinning.
Oh,
they show up for the PTA meeting or something to debate about the bad calendars that they got. And Homer's lousy smarch weather because they added an extra month to the year.
Yeah, oh, I love The Simpsons, man. If only they had an episode about SF in translation, wouldn't that be good?
They say Simpsons has done it all, and I don't think they've done that yet.
So they have not done it all.
So they have not done it all yet, because they're missing out on a huge universe.
Seriously. What's wrong with them? Well, anyway. So, at least a lot more went on in April, SFT related. So we've got all kinds of good stuff to talk about.
Mm-hmm. And a lot dropped already for May, too.
Oh, I know. But we won't talk about that. We're just going to talk about April. So, should we dive right into the books?
Yeah, sure.
All right. So, there were several that came out. A few novels and a few collections. So, the first one is Waist Tide by Chen Chufan, and translated by Ken Liu from Tor. And I mean, anyone listening to this, unless they're not on Twitter or Facebook or the internet at all, you have to have heard about Waist Tide because it's just everywhere. Did you have plans to read this, Daniel? I feel like you said you were, but I couldn't remember.
I mean, it would interest me perhaps, but there's other ones that have come out prior.
Mm-hmm.
And so I still want to read those at some point. There's just been so much Chinese sci-fi that has come out.
I know.
I can't keep up with it. And so, even begin to. And so there's just so much that it's to the point where I don't know where to begin, so I'm just not going to begin.
Yeah. Well, I think Chen has had many stories out, in Invisible Planets and Broken Stars. Ken Liu is, his translator, and this is his first, novel length, work. And I reviewed it. It's, my review's, going to be in, World Lit Today in the next issue. And, it's just, there's so much going on. It's about globalization and, the perils and pitfalls of runaway globalization. They talk about economic hitmen, which I didn't even know what that was until 10 years ago. But apparently now, everybody knows what it is. But, the Americans or, even just people from the West, going into, quote, developing nations or anything that's not the West and being do this, do that, and cause we say so and it's good for you. And then it winds up just wrecking, a country's entire economy. And, Waist Tide is also about the e-waste business, where, your cell phone's dead or your computer's dead and you recycle it, but like it actually goes to places like Silicon Isle that's depicted in Waste Tide, and people like really like low wage laborers are like picking out the rare earth metals and everything to kind of recycle them to use in other things, and they're getting paid like barely anything, and it's like toxic and hazardous, but it's sent over to these countries because it's cheaper labor. And so, I mean, he brings up so many different, and then of course there's the whole like biological artificial hybridization, he talks about consciousness fusing with, some sort of robotic technology and, what that does to the brain. And there's so much in this novel.
Oh, that's right. That's why I was interested in looking into what it had.
Yeah, there's so much going on. I don't know if it's trying to do too much. Like, that's what I was wondering. It was trying to do too much at one point, but his stories are just brilliant, like his short stories. And I think maybe it's just a matter of, writing some more novels and just kind of like seeing how much to put into each one. Like, I don't know. I obviously I've never written a novel, so I don't know. But I feel like the novel could have been so much longer, or it could have been more focused, but it's still pretty brilliant. So,
Oh, you've read plenty, so even if you haven't,
yeah, and I love his stuff. Like it's like I'm not gonna say that Waste Tide is like my most favorite novel ever, but it is definitely up there. It's good stuff, and yeah, so that's about Waste Tide. So you have plans to read The Weight of Snow in English or in French?
I got the original French language through interlibrary loan. I'm still I want to get through Vestige first, and so I doubt I'll be able to, but I kind of was curious because both of the French, the other one I'll get to later, both of them kind of intrigued me this month. And so this one's actually from Quebec, written in French, of course. And so, yeah, just looking at them briefly, they looked intriguing. And because of French, I was definitely interested. So I grabbed both of those to kind of look through now.
Yeah, I mean, I only know that The Weight of Snow is like, I'm not sure it's exactly a sequel, prequel, or even in the same universe. I think it's in the same universe as the author. His name is Christian Guay-Poliquin. So it's somehow in that universe. And I read Running on Fumes a couple of years ago. I have to say, again, I wouldn't say that it was like my most favorite novel, but it is unlike anything that I've read.
Is that one dystopian or post-apocalyptic in any way?
Well, it's it's very like vaguely post-apocalyptic.
Yeah.
And it's mixed with Greek mythology. So it's like the Minotaur, but in post-apocalyptic Canada with like it's very much like everything's kind of crumbling. So like Mr. Robot kind of thing, like everything's crumbling and it's going kind of slowly, but then it's just everything, and and next thing you know, you're like, where is everybody? Everything's just kind of falling apart. And then this guy's driving, trying to get to his dad, and he like it's almost like a road. It's like a road novel, but through this like wasteland, and weird things are happening. But it's very muted. It's weird, and it's definitely unique. So I want to get The Weight of Snow. I don't even have it. But I really want to read it. So
I'd love to be able to, for these. I mean, I just feel because I can actually read it in French, I feel it would be useful, or I would be useful in being able to compare them then.
Yeah, that'd be great.
To be able to read the original text, but then also read the translation to get a sense of what was done from both angles. And so, yeah, I looked into this not knowing there was a previous novel. And so when I saw your show notes, I went and looked, and just reading over like the Goodreads comments and reviews in French, I got the sense that it's set in the same universe, and that one person said basically it stands on its own, but you're going to get more out of it if you have read the first novel. So there must be things, I don't know whether it be characters or, I mean, they were that vague that there's things that intersect, I guess, but that you don't absolutely have to have read the first one. But this one in particular seems to be about sort of like the oppressiveness and desolation of snow, and deals with a character that becomes injured and is then being taken care of within like effectively a lodge where they're trapped in by the snow pretty much. And just, yeah, snow all around. And within this, post-apocalyptic village is kind of what the vibe I was getting. So it sounds similar, where it's this vaguely sort of post-apocalyptic, desolate landscape, and dealing with some of the similar themes, but now from the point of view of sort of symbology of snow.
I don't want to think about snow anymore after this winter. Yes. I really don't. No more snow. Okay, well, from the cold, icy tundra of Canada, is Canada, that has tundra, right?
In the far north, yes, it does.
Okay. So from Canada to Argentina, you like that? You like that?
Yes.
Yeah. It was smooth.
From the cold depths of Canada to the cold depths of space.
Yeah. Yeah. Dark Constellations. I also have read that. This is interesting. I've read a lot of the books that came out in April. And also I reviewed it for World Lit today, and it is I mean, I don't know what to say. It's very interesting. It combines kind of like a botanist in the late 19th century discovering some strange things in I'm not exactly sure where he is. It might be a forest or something. Something weird is going on with the flora and fauna. And then kind of you jump to the 1980s with this one guy who is, he's learning to program, he's learning to create computer viruses. He's kind of coming up of age with the internet, kind of like we did ourselves. And then it jumps forward further, like, a couple of decades, and to this kind of world that we find in Waste Tide, interestingly enough, where the author, Paula, I'm not sure exactly how to pronounce her last name, Oloixerek, she's also interested in the intersection between the biological and the artificial. But while in Waste Tide, it's how does the artificial kind of invade the biological. In Dark Constellations, it's kind of like, how do you turn the artificial into something biological? So she's very interested in virus in its double meanings. So a computer virus becoming like functioning like a biological virus in a biological system. And but the story itself is...
It sounds like a trip.
It is. And it might make more sense if you're like high on something. I don't know. I'm really not sure because I was not high on anything. Not that I ever do. But it's just like...
Well, it talks here about like hallucinogenic plants and all kinds of, so...
It's very hallucinogenic. Like at one point there's a rat that's talking. Like, I don't know. It's kind of jumpy. And there's so many ideas, and I feel like I want each one of those ideas to be...
Yeah, it seems like it has a lot.
So much going on. I'm telling you, Waste Tide and Dark Constellations, China and Argentina, two totally different authors, two totally different parts of the world, and they're both very interested in the same nexus, you know what I mean? And and I found that fascinating. And both of them are trying to do a lot in one thing, in one package. So I'm very interested in what other people are going to be saying about dark constellations, but I mean,
Yeah, I'm curious to see how the biology holds up.
that I have no idea. So yes, that's for you to tell me. I was like, yeah, that sounds right. I don't know. Uh, and then the other one that I was going to mention is Flowers of Mold, which is a collection out from Open Letter, one of my favorite presses, and it's one of those collections. It's like a lot of these women writing like collections of surrealism that it just seems to be a big thing, like Samantha Schweblin, and the author of Flowers of Mold, and there's an Indonesian collection that came out last year. Just a lot of these kinds of things. Mars, they're all just kind of a similar type of interest. And so I'm going to be reading that. I already have a copy. It's very pretty. It's a really nice cover.
It is pretty.
It's almost like Dark Constellations, this kind of verdant, kind of flowery cover, There is an excerpt now online at Yale Review of Flowers of Mold if anybody wants to kind of read it first before you get the book.
And so that's a collection, so it's right. So it's an excerpt, as in it's like select stories from it.
It's one story. Yeah,
one story. Okay,
it's one story. Yeah, and but I mean, if it's Open Letter, it's good. So you might as well just get it. You know what I mean? So,
another one to the pile.
I'm sorry. Like I know your TBR pile is crazy now, but yeah, and there are a bunch of others that.
Unfortunately, I never get these ones to review. So
yeah, it's hard getting some of the review books. Like you email, and they're like silence. Just to mention the other collections that are out that, oh my god, I'm not going to get to them soon, but I wish I could. Is The Night Circus, which is from Slovakia. Whiskey Tales, which you were going to talk about, right? Yes. From Belgian author, and that's it. So that's all of them. So, anything else about books, or should we move on to short stories?
No, move on to short stories. And there's quite the list.
Yes. So we had very different picks. I'm interested in in what you really liked this past month.
So, within Clark's World, the one I actually liked best was In Search of Your Memories by Nian Yu, translated by Andy Dudak. And so this one, the story dealt with a familiar theme in science fiction of people transferring their consciousness to some sort of technology to extend life beyond the life of the body. And so, like, to a second world or second life, basically. But the narrator of this particular story is somebody who works to find and restore memories in clients who have had imperfect consciousness uploads. So during the process, and I found this actually interesting, the story described how it goes through and takes from the brain the sort of patterns of memory or the patterns of electrochemical signaling that make up our brains for actual memories, but it has to filter out things like how to respond when your knee gets bumped against and how to breathe. All the sorts of things that our brain does that aren't actually memory that you wouldn't need to have if you no longer have an actual biological body. And so during that, some things get lost, and it's not 100%. So the narrator ends up looking into this client and realizes that there's really big memory gaps that are pretty inexplicable and kind of bizarre, and starts looking into that further. And so what I found interesting about it is kind of where the story went in terms of why there are these gaps, because it ultimately doesn't come about, it's not about that mystery per se, but when the narrator discovers what's going on, it's more the ethical dilemma of, do I tell the client this? Or is this something that we just say, oh, sorry, we couldn't find things? And so I found that an interesting theme to the story, and I just really enjoyed how it was written and stuff, too.
Yeah, I like that, and It's always an interesting kind of story. I just kept thinking of Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's what it's called. And just the other, like, it is. It's like a very common kind of.
It's a common thing. Mm-hmm.
And I'm just like, okay, ethical dilemma. But, like, the reason why, the actual reason why the memories were messed up was interesting. Yeah, that's kind of an interesting twist. But I don't know. It's there's certain things that have been done so many times that I'm already like, I approach it like, oh boy.
I can get that. Yeah.
Yeah. But no, it was good. It was still a good story.
In general, I found the stories this month. I don't know if there was maybe one that I just really loved. Most of them I thought were good, but they didn't blow me away per se.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So Clark's World had two, Flowering and In Search of Your Memories, and the Flowering by Soyeon Jung was translated from the Korean. So this was the first of the Korean SFT that Clark's World will be publishing this year. It's translated by Ji-Hyun Park and Gord Seller, and I've been talking to Gord Seller. I've talked to him like, I think on social media, years ago, about Korean SFT. And yeah, so I
there's a whole blog on it seems.
Yeah.
I hadn't realized.
So his stuff, so I was really glad to see this here.
We'll have to remind him about telling us, because when I checked out his blog, that's where I found things that had come up in the past we never heard about or didn't realize.
I don't know why people don't tell me things. Here's I don't understand. Like, you would think that like my email would now be on, publishers like lists of just like, hey, tell her this, some free publicity. But anyway, I like the Flowering because it was a little bit, it was a little bit overwritten. Like there was some just kind of like, okay, like we get it, it's talking on and on and on and on. But the central thing about trying to disrupt, networks, like, government surveillance of the internet and the censorship, and, by planting organic routers that bloom like flowers that disrupt government routers, and kind of like biologically, invading kind of the structure that's already there. And kind of like the flowering as like a freedom of communication. Again, this combination of biological and artificial that I find just really interesting. It was very well described. Like I could almost see it, and that was, that was the kind of thing where, like, I'm reading the story, like, ooh, that's interesting. So, it just had that kind of kernel to it that really, and I like the narrator. The narrator was it was like, the style had energy to it. Like, I liked the story, the way the kind of the pace of it. But I did think that there's a little too much to it sometimes, but.
Yeah, I also thought it was a little overwritten, and the style actually got to me, particularly at the beginning. Like, I kind of started off on a sour note while reading it, I guess. Because it felt to me like I had gotten onto a bus and I was like being forced to listen to somebody's phone conversation from one side only.
So true.
And so I'm like, wait, what's the question? I don't know what the question is. Why am I getting an answer? What are they talking about?
Yes, that's a really good analogy. Yeah.
And so the way it began, it got better. And once you figured out what was going on and such.
It did, yeah.
But at first I was really kind of annoyed.
Yeah, I understand.
And so, this was one of the ones I didn't dislike it per se, but it wasn't, a favorite either. But the symbolism of the flowering and what that meant for flowering resistance or freedom, and then also like just the relationship between the sisters and such, I thought was interesting.
Yeah. I'm trying to think what it made me think of something I had watched recently. Like a story, I can't remember what it was. Maybe it was something from the Electric Dreams. I think it's on Amazon Prime that we watched recently.
Okay.
But anyway, but you liked these two that I didn't get a chance to read. Paulina and I Have a Secret. So tell us about those.
So Paulina is one of the ones, so translator who we've talked about many times, Toshia Kamai, actually emailed us and let us know about it and also gave us access to be able to review some of the short stories that he had translated. And so Paulina, I don't want to say too much about it. It's basically a dystopic speculative fiction story that takes place in a future Buenos Aires. And it's at a time where employment is not easily attained and a lot of rights, particularly the rights of women, are being restricted. And so I don't want to say more about the plot than that, but it's a really timely story, I thought. So it connected just because the issues in it are all about things like immigration and citizenship and female rights. And so from that perspective, I thought it was done well. It wasn't just, let's deal with these themes because they're important now. It was done in an interesting way that was character driven. And so I thought that one was just worth checking out because it's not one of the ones that necessarily you'll be able to freely get, but it's in Moon City Review, which you should be able to find online. And then he also, I don't want to talk too much about this one, but he also let us know about 2 Leaf novels that he translated from Japanese author Yoshiro Takayusu, published in Delos, a journal of translation and world literature. And for these, they're basically a pair of short fairy tales where the Japanese author is kind of taking the classic kind of form of fairy tales, but imbuing them with modern themes. And so the stories themselves were neat, but they're actually followed by a long sort of biography and explanation behind them that he calls these little stories leaf stories because they're short enough. They're almost like flash fiction. They're short enough that you could fit them onto a leaf. And there's a bit of information in there as well that the word in Japanese for word, so literally their Japanese word for the word word, is actually a compound word that is a combination of talk and the Japanese word for leaf, as well as being fragment. And so it's like leaf fragment then kind of translates to word. And it's a collection of words. And so it's like, I thought it was just cool because it's dealing with translation, it's very meta,
Yeah,
it's like dealing with the etymology of words, but putting those words in translation, but then also being a story, a fairy tale. So I've never been a huge fan of fairy tales, but there's lots of people out there that, adore them. And so if you are an aficionado of fairy tales throughout the world and how they're done, these are short and, what you'd expect from a fairy tale, but kind of in a neat way that has modern things in it that you wouldn't expect to see in an older fairy tale per se.
I like reworked fairy tales, yeah.
The first, if I recall, is kind of about intercultural relationships. The second, amongst other things, the second one's kind of like has a lot of environmental type themes in it and ecological stuff. That's
cool. Yeah, I need to read those.
And so, yeah, I Have a Secret. I reached out to the translator of this story. So it's I Have a Secret by Raquel Castro, translated from the Spanish by Lawrence Schimmel. And so I reached out to him on Twitter, just asking, hey, it's not, freely available. For the review, could we possibly get a copy? And so he put me in contact with the publisher, who very kindly sent me the whole collection of Tales from the Shadow Booth #3.
Nice.
And I'm just excited in general. That's the one story in translation in this collection, but the whole collection has a lot of stuff that really interests me. So I'll probably end up reviewing that for Skiffy and Fanny or somewhere. But he let me know that they intend to have translations in every one that they do.
Well, that's great.
So I was excited to hear that. And so this particular one, probably I still haven't read the Yiddish one that we just found out about.
Yeah.
But of all the other ones that came out this month, this was my favorite, I think, because I am a sucker for kind of dark fantasy and horror. And this one I thought it was just done so wonderfully of balancing things that are very sweet and very sinister. And so it's a story told from the point of view of a small boy, Emilio. And so it's, the language has all the things you'd expect from a little child, from a little kid. The run-on sentences, the stream of consciousness, the no barrier to say what you're thinking. But then also that begins to change because he's thinking things or saying things that adults around him are then, ignoring or saying, oh, that's not important or don't seem to be concerned. And Emilio is concerned because he has a secret and he's just observed his mother who's newly returned from the hospital and she doesn't seem quite right and something seems wrong with her. But all the adults seem completely not bothered by this and, oh, it's just the medication, she's ill. And so as the reader, you're also thinking like, yeah, children don't necessarily understand all the complexities. But Emilio is less sure about what the adults think. And so he finds increasingly he grows up in a way, but he finds it not in a good way per se because he begins learning to hide thoughts and the power of lies and the power of keeping secrets then. And maybe there is actually something sinister about the mother. So it's just this perfect kind of mix for me between that innocence of childhood and beautiful, beautiful language mixed with horror and something beneath the surface that seems really not right.
Ooh, that sounds great.
I really love that. But without being disturbing to the level of like the story we talked about last month, where you have like incest and rape and all that other stuff.
I could not no.
This doesn't have anything, like even though there's kids in it, there's nothing in it that it's like, good God.
Okay, good, because it can't handle it. Well, let me tell you, I know I've said this before about Lawrence Schimmel, but he is just like rock star.
He's really nice.
He's amazing. He is just rock star, translator from the Spanish. So much great speculative fiction that he's translated from authors from all over the world, Mexico, Spain, Argentina. He's just amazing. So that's great. I'm really glad that you got a copy of that. I want to read that. He told me about this I think a couple months ago, because he's really good about like letting me know stuff. Like he sends me stuff. I'm like, thank you, because otherwise, so that you
can put it on there.
Yeah, I would never know. Yeah. So.
And they sent me some of the previous ones from months past, I think, too. Which I don't think I'll get to them to actually review or anything, but yeah, it was definitely really nice to.
It's good to have, yeah. To
see those. Eventually, I'll get around to them.
Yeah, well, when you have all your copious time.
Oh yeah.
But yeah, well, I.
The other stories you liked.
I did. So The Last Journey, by Perluca Florin, from Romania.
Oh yes.
Yeah, he. I posted that on the SF and Translation site. I really like it because it's kind of like this is kind of like his stuff is, kind of like a mix of allegory and like thought provoking, kind of science fiction meets allegory, and this was very. It was a little more kind of lighthearted, where people are looking for God and, in this story, they like find him and they kind of give him a piece of their mind, but they have to travel through like all kinds of, like a wormhole type thing. And like, then they, and then it's like, oh, look, it's God. Let's give him a piece of our mind. And I just thought it was just an interesting, nice piece of flash fiction. That kind of mixed the scientific and the religious and the technological and, kind of the human quest to find God and, ask, why he does all these things. And And so that was pretty cool. I like that story. I think my favorite of the whole of the stories this month that I was able to read was, and I know this is going to sound weird, but it was 77.
Yeah,
the
that
most
surprised
violent, bloody, dark story of the whole thing. It was pretty great. It was published in The Dark magazine by Francisco Ortega, translated by David Bowles. Ortega's from Chile, and the story is about it's based on the real events of the political, kind of like all of the bad things, yes, happening in Latin America in the 20th century, especially in Chile when people were being disappeared for a couple of decades,
and even late 19th.
Yeah, exactly, and so Ortega takes that, the political disappearances, killings, and constructs a kind of an alternate explanation involving like zombification, or like using like a sorcerer to bring back dead soldiers and to then use them against to threaten the other countries that are threatening to invade Chile, and this group of kind of the undead are continually being kind of reshaped because they deteriorate over time. And so every 20 years they go around and there's like 77 deaths in Santiago, and then it stops. And each time someone looks into it, like, why are like 77 people killed? And then it stops for 20 years, and then 77 more people are killed. And it's very haunting. It's very well written. It is just an interesting take on on the conflict that otherwise is evil people doing evil things, but it's, this has like kind of an extra supernatural element to it. I thought it was very well done.
So yeah, we had opposite opinions this month on these. That's funny.
Yeah, what's up with that, Daniel?
I don't know. So yeah, with both of those, like this one, I loved the beginning, loved the end, and the middle just bothered me. Like, there were parts that I just found really overwritten in terms of, like, giving an explanation for exactly why things were.
The explanation was a little, yeah.
I mean, there were just parts that I thought dragged and had too much.
Mm-hmm.
But then also, it seemed odd to me that you're taking a historical event that has all this atrocity in it, and then saying, like, making an excuse for it in some ways of like, oh, it's just something supernatural. And it kind of lessens the fact that these were things that humans did to some extent. And so I don't know why, but I found that somewhat troublesome. And then also, like, there was like a sense of futility, like, well, why fight Chile? Why stop Pinochet from being in power or any of these things, because there's no fighting an army of zombies.
Right.
And so like I thought it was a cool idea and such, but then also as I began thinking about it, I was like, I had some issues with it. So it was one of those where there were parts I really liked about it, and then there were other parts where I really didn't like it. So
well, I totally, that is part of what made it very unsettling. I saw Ortega as, considering that he is from Chile, like if someone who wasn't from Chile wrote this story, I would have been like,
that's true.
What? But since he is
yeah.
Chilean, and he's writing about his own nation's past, I was seeing it as a way of, almost a way that other people write about atrocities and genocide of their own people in different ways. You know what I mean? Like, you're coming at it from a different way where you're not excusing anybody, but you're shaping it in a way, like you're kind of retelling it. I mean, it kind of can help you get through it. You know what I mean? Like, kind of getting past the Because in a way, when it's like, it's humans doing this to other humans, and it's terrible. But people are always looking for a different reason, like a higher reason. Like, is this like the spirit of evil taking over people? Is it something beyond just humans being evil? And kind of trying to give it another explanation as a way of understanding why things are happening the way they are. But yes, it can very easily turn into is it being flippant about something that's an atrocity. So it raises a lot of really interesting questions.
Mm-hmm. And yeah, I guess you're right. It's also, I mean, it still is people doing this stuff too. It's just people doing it to people through an intermediary of supernatural. So yeah, you are right. But as I was reading it, I just got that sense of like that troubled me for whatever reason.
Yeah, I just kept saying to myself, well, he's Chilean, so it's okay. It's like when
I read somewhere that, I mean, I don't remember where it was, if it was a website associated with the translator or him, that or if it was in the notes after the story or something, that like he did this as a way of tackling those things, of tackling that history. And so I do get it, but as I read it, and maybe that's what it's meant to do, is make it troubling. It did it much more so than, like, say, something that we're sadly more divorced from now, like Nazis, right? You have Nazi zombie movies. You have just even in Marvel, right, where we put all these extra things onto, like, oh no, it's Nazis wasn't bad enough. We also have to make it Hydra, and we have to make it the Red Skull and all this other stuff. It's like, oh, it wasn't bad enough for you?
Right, it's got to be right. We have to make it. Well, I was going to take it in a similar direction, but Primo Levi, who himself survived the Holocaust, wrote a lot of science fiction, speculative fiction that I hadn't known about until recently. And also Stanislaw Lem, I mean, all of his stuff is science fiction, but people read a lot into it about kind of representations of robots, and mob kind of actions and things as being very reminiscent of the Holocaust, of Nazis, kind of allegorical stand-ins, and people, some people read that as the only way he could really come to terms with the brutality that he had witnessed, because he lived it, whereas if someone who didn't live it wrote that, it would be problematic, you know what I mean? Should we move on to future things?
Yeah, I think so. The other reviews, I had thoughts to compare, like the Romanian author, like from between his two stories and then the other short stories. So if people are interested, they should go onto the site to read about all this.
Yes, I try to stay on top of things.
Yeah. So yeah, future books.
So I'm particularly looking forward to The Redemption of Time by Bao Shu, so more Chinese SFT. I have read this already prior to the final publication, and it was amazing, but it was a long time ago that I read it, so I need to read it again. And it's 3-body trilogy fan fiction. That is just extremely high level, high quality. So calling it fan fiction is a little bit not quite a good kind of description, but it is fan fiction. And Bao Shu is, a science fiction writer in his own right. Redemption of Time picks up what happened to the person whose brain was launched into space to meet the Trisolaran fleet. What happened to him, and it takes the story off in a crazy interesting direction. So, if you liked the 3-body trilogy, Redemption of Time gives you more to kind of go on. You can continue to learn what happened to the characters. And of course, Legend of the Galactic Heroes, which I've talked about, a lot, is nearing the completion. Volume 9 is coming out very soon, and then Volume 10, which is the last one, will be out soon after that. So looking forward to finishing that 10-volume space opera from Japan. And The Heart of the Circle.
From Angry Robot Books.
Yes, it is. It is a work by Karen Landsman from Israel, written in Hebrew, translated. Can't remember what the translator's name is. Daniela something. Sorry, I can't find it right now. But it is fantasy, and it kind of talks about sorcerers, religious extremists, kind of, a battle for for legitimacy and survival. It's always interesting and exciting when there's new fantasy or science fiction coming out of Israel written in Hebrew, because it's, a lot of writers there write straight in English. And, Hebrew is a very, very different language than English. It's got a whole other, a different structure. I mean, for God's sake, it's read from right to left, just like Arabic. I mean, it's a different structure, different, it's actually very, very recent. Modern Hebrew was put together, constructed from, based on biblical Hebrew, but it's its own kind of, relatively new language. And it has done a lot of work, kind of growing over the decades, adapting to different genres. And it's just so interesting to think about the development of modern Hebrew and how it tackles science fiction and fantasy in a way that, that kind of grapples with modern issues where, the concepts that the language has are maybe, not the same as in English all the time. This is the kind of thing I know I'm not explaining it correctly, but it's how a language grapples with an issue. English grapples with, issues of, for instance, time travel differently than, maybe Chinese or Native American language or Hebrew or Arabic or Polish, just depending on, future tense, past tense, how the language is structured. So I'm just always fascinated at Hebrew SFT and the kinds of things that the authors are writing about. So this will be great. I like Karen Landsman a lot.
Yeah, so the translator is Daniela Zamir. And there's actually unfortunately, Angry Robot Books, you need to get more actual translator information on your web pages, and the advertising for this, none of the book details or anything had any information on that. But they did have a link to a Tor.com article that is an interview with Karen Landsman that talks about the translation process. That seems to be pretty interesting. So
yeah, that's great. I'm looking forward to that. So you are going to be reading Les Contes du Whisky.
Right. So Whiskey Tales, in addition to Le Poids de la Neige, the weight of snow that we talked about earlier, this other French translation out this month caught my eye because I like dark fantasy and horror fiction. And so this collection from a Belgian author that I hadn't heard of before, Jean Ray, I picked up a copy of that through the library as well. And so even if I don't get to all of these, I want to read through a few of the short stories that this collection has just to get a sense for what his stories are like. And then I'm hoping to also be able to get an English version that I might be able to compare to. So I'll have to look into that. But so yeah, that's what I'm looking forward to.
Cool. So as we wrap up, in the books needing a translation home.
Yes.
This doesn't quite fit. I mean, it's okay. I'm doing some more research into kind of just generally what SFT is out there, what exists, and the Daedalus book of you name it fantasy is. I mean, they have so many. Flemish fantasy, French fantasy, Portuguese fantasy, just goes on and on. So I was like, oh boy, let me get these from the library. So I got Flemish and was it Dutch? I don't remember. Anyway,
I thought there was one that was called Dutch and one was Flemish. I mean, even though there's overlap.
Dutch and Flemish. Okay, yeah. Okay, so the Flemish one, I'm kind of, so I was like, look. I got them mainly for the introductions, just to kind of see, because I don't have the time to read all this stuff. But I just started reading a couple of the stories because I'm like, Flemish, like I know next to nothing about this, and I was reading the story by Eve, or it was actually a selection, an excerpt from a novel by a writer, Yves Petrie, who writes sci-fi. He's still alive. He was born, I think, in the late 60s, so he's still writing and young and everything. And the excerpt was great. It was so crazy. Something about a guy working in robotics. He has, he's kind of like an emotionless person. He just doesn't have much affect. And so working in robotics is kind of perfect for him, but he designs a robot that also doesn't really, the robot has no emotions, and the robot just wants to, kind of maximize its efficiency, and, where that's headed, so, but the style was so, it was kind of like someone, like you were saying, someone kind of sits down next to you on the bus and starts talking to you, but this guy's, the style was so engaging that you're reading it feeling like this person is talking right at you. Meanwhile, you're just, you're reading it, but it's just very, it's someone who's very not just engaging, but someone who kind of ropes you in until you're like, wait a minute, like where did the time go? So I just really liked it. The translation was just really great. Not that I know Flemish, I have no idea, but it read very, very smoothly. So I want more Yves Petrie, guys. Now there is some a story on Words Without Borders from a few years ago. It's quite bloody. It's I'm not exactly sure what is going on. I kind of had to stop reading because I was like, oh boy. It's not very speculative in terms of, it's like, I'm not sure what the context is. So that's why I'm not really sure about what that story is. I think it's from another novel. I'm not sure what's going on there, but the excerpt which that I was just talking about, called the Straggler, is sci-fi. So, but the whole thing hasn't.
And he does have other speculative stuff.
He does, yes. Not much has been translated, so I'm just like, someone do it.
Somebody get on that.
Do it, yes. All right, so Reader's Corner. What's going on in your corner?
So I got the copy of Mars from Feminist Press, so we talk about. And so I should be starting that soon. The last day of classes was today. We're entering finals week.
Woo-hoo!
So somewhat calming down in terms of things that I'm juggling. So yeah, it's a short collection. So my hope is that you're willing to put up a review of that on SF in Translation website.
I don't know. This Daniel Hauser, I'm not sure if I want to publish something by him.
If I'm not welcome in that venue, I'll go search of another. I'll just put it up on my blog. But yeah, so that's
of course
on
I will
my
publish
plate.
that.
And then I thanks.
Yes,
that's good.
Yes.
And then I know you're reading. I saw on Twitter you're reading the Afro SF Volume 3.
Yes.
And so we were just talking from Skiffy and Fanny podcast, the Reading Rangers series that I sometimes take part in for talking about short stories, what to do for this month. And so I think we're going to end up probably doing Strange Horizons, focus on Nigeria. We want to do like a world kind of sci-fi perspective. And so we're doing that because we can get it, and it's, relatively short, and we can do it with a quick enough turnaround. But I suggested the FRS F3 for perhaps a future edition of it. But yeah, that'll probably hinge on whether we're able to get copies to read. But there's probably interest. My interest peaked based off of what I saw from it, and even earlier volumes as well. But then what you said, so
it's so good. Just one story after another. Really just great stuff that I just wouldn't otherwise have read, except Strange Horizons was like, so, gonna review FRS Volume 3. I was like, okay. I mean, they're all written in English. None of them are translated. But these...
Oh, none of them are
None
translated.
of them, no. They're all English.
Okay, I didn't realize that.
Which is why I wouldn't have read because it's like I'm barely keeping myself going with I like there's so much to read that's SFT that I don't even get to stuff originally written in English. But I'm really glad that Maureen asked me, because it's just fabulous. I love it. Great stuff.
It's close enough, I think.
It's good, yeah. I mean,
in terms of the perspective,
it's not Anglo-centric. It's but it's still like lots of really good mix. Fantasy, sci-fi, just great stuff. So I'm loving it. I'm about halfway through now. So write my review soon. Yeah. So anything else this month?
No, that's about it for translation, at least.
Cool. Well, everybody, remember to send me and Daniel any and all SFT related news and links via Facebook, Twitter, email, carrier pigeon, whatever. Rachel at SF
Semaphore.
Right, exactly. Telepathy. So you can reach me at Rachel at sfintranslation.com. And Daniel, how can people reach you?
Probably best is Twitter. I have Facebook, but honestly, I never go on it much, other than very briefly.
Yeah.
So Twitter, and then my email can be found easily enough with Google too.
Great. All right. Well, that's it for this month, everybody. Happy reading, and we will talk to you next month.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you for listening to Speculative Fiction in Translation, a member of the Skiffy and Fanty Network, hosted by Rachel Cordasco and Daniel Hauser. If you would like to contact the Speculative Fiction in Translation podcast directly, please do so at rachel@sfintranslation.com, or you can visit sfintranslation.com. Additionally, you can find Rachel on Twitter at rcordas and Daniel at read1000lives. To find out more about the podcasts on the Skiffy and Fanty Network, please visit us at skiffyandfanty.com. If you would like to support the network, you can do so at patreon.com/skiffyandfanty. To keep up to date on everything that is happening at the Skiffy and Fanty Network, please visit skiffyandfanty.com/newsletter. The music from this podcast is No Disclaimer by Jesse Spillane. To find more about this music, please visit freemusicarchive.org.